would like to pass on the baton to our next panel onto the stage under the roaring title, Powering Up a Country into the Middle Income Club. Moderated by Syed Mafiz Kamal, also known as Onik, Senior Analyst of the Center for Research and Information. Onik, on the dot 2:30 here in Dhaka, I'm passing over to you. The floor is yours now.
Thank you, Sebastian. I hope everybody can hear me. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're tuning in from in the world. Welcome to the first panel of the conference, Powering Up a Country into the Middle Income Club. Arguably, this is the only panel which is not a fully academic one. It's a policy discussion panel. I'll just quickly introduce our panelists and then we'll go ahead and start the discussion. We have with us Ms. Bärbel Höhn. Sebastian has already introduced her, so I will not go into further introduction. We have with us some of the leading policymakers in Bangladesh, and also they have worked around the world. We have Dr. Ahsan Mansur, who leads one of the leading private think tanks in the country, Policy Research Institute. He has had a career in the IMF, and he has worked on many long-term national plans of Bangladesh, where he has worked on energy financing of strategies and other energy and power sector related issues. We also have with us Professor Mohammad Tamim. He's arguably one of the biggest energy experts in Bangladesh, and he has also worked in different countries around the world. He is currently a professor at Bangladesh University of Engineering and Technology, BUET, the prestigious BUET. He was also with BRAC University previously. We also have with us Dr. K.A.S. Murshid, who is leading one of the oldest think tank in Bangladesh, Bangladesh Institute of Development Studies. It's a publicly funded research institute. He has worked extensively on energy sector in the sense of rural economy. He is a rural economy expert, and he has worked extensively on rural sector of Bangladesh. We'll hear something from him on rural electrification, hopefully today. Let me quickly go into a question. I'll ask Ms. Bärbel Höhn. Energy, as you have already said, you have already mentioned some of the issues, that energy is one of the critical factors that hinders growth and poverty eradication in developing countries. Bangladesh has graduated from a towards a middle income status country in 2015, and is graduating from UN designated LDC status soon. And even like 5-6 years ago, the electrification rate was below 60%. So the challenges have been big, and Bangladesh has come to certain extent overcome these challenges. But how do you think different countries are dealing with it? What are the energy options they're going about to graduate into higher income status?
Thank you for giving me the word. So yeah, maybe I will tell from some experience I had in different countries. And I think the most important point is a political will. That actors are really interested in building up renewables. So when we started in Germany 20 years ago, the energy suppliers, they said, no, it's not possible to have more renewables than 5%. 5% is a limit, and we need coal, and we need nuclear power plants, and we need everything for an industrial country like Germany. And we said, no, believe in miracles. And now miracles are reality. So in the last year in Germany, we had 52%, 10 times more than the energy company thought that is a limit, 10 times more. The majority, 52% of our electricity was coming from renewables in last year. And that's why we really introduced some very important instruments to push renewables and to participate the whole population of Germany. For example, you did a lot with solar home systems, but also you can do a lot in bigger companies, you have rooftops and put solar home systems and put solar systems, photovoltaic plants on these roofs. I think it's really not so easy for you because you have such a lot of inhabitants in a very small country, more than in Germany, only half of the area, but double of the inhabitants. But nevertheless, there are possibilities to implement renewables and implement especially photovoltaic. And I think, as I said, it's very important to have a network from parliamentarians, from political decision makers, especially from regional mayors, and but also from scientists and different, and even, for example, from the economy, and bring all this together. And that's why this conference is so important.
Is there any example from any of the sub-Saharan African countries, what they are doing and some lesson that can be learned?
Yes, so I think the situation in sub-Saharan Africa is so different from that in Bangladesh, because in the whole world, we have about nearly 1 million people who have no access to electricity, but 600 million from them are living in Africa. So half of the population in sub-Saharan Africa have no access to electricity, and 90% of them living in rural areas. And that's why we are acting in these rural areas to bring electricity to this very far away from a network, to bring electricity there. And that's why we are looking for mini grids and solar home systems, because it's too expensive to expand the national grid to all these villages far away. Because we have another situation in Africa, we have big areas and less population. And so we need other solutions than in Bangladesh. Bangladesh is a bit more a front runner, so we can learn from the experience in Bangladesh. And but the very important thing is that with renewables, we find a solution for different situations in different countries, because we have a variety of renewables and we are very creative, and renewables are flexible. And that's, I think, we can learn from all these countries.
Thank you. Dr. Mansur, we have heard from Mrs. Höhn that there can be lessons learned from Bangladesh. So in last 10 years, at least, Bangladesh has in many ways transformed its energy sector, and it has taken many policy decisions. But what was the cost of this transformation? Can you shed a light on it? Dr. Mansur, you might have to unmute yourself.
Am I now unmuted? Okay. Yeah. First, I start with the point that my earlier speaker said, that there has to be a political will, and political will is the starting point. And what we saw in Bangladesh is in part a result of that political will, because the government made a commitment that by 2021, in the perspective plan, they want to electrify all houses in Bangladesh, every household in Bangladesh. And that commitment has been followed through. Yes, we might have done it somewhat better way, we might have done this costly way, but bottom line is that Bangladesh is reaching that destination that almost all households will be connected or will be having access to electricity in some form by the end of this year, and they are on track. So that's one important thing. If we look at the Bangladesh journey, certainly it involves three things. It is in terms of the coverage, as I said, that it is going to achieve universal access to electricity in the country, increase in generation capacity massively, perhaps beyond what we needed, and that's one of the weaknesses of our strategy, I think. And third one is also important, is that private sector has been a driving force in this move towards electrification. Unlike the past, where public sector was the dominant supplier of electricity, this additional electricity in Bangladesh has come primarily from private sector side. So those are the driving forces. Now the result is 100% access, we will be getting very shortly. Now issue is that, what are the weaknesses of that? Yes, of course, when you are using about 50% of your capacity, installed capacity, there's a lot of idle capacity, and you're paying for it in one way or another, either through your investment or through your capacity payments. You're paying for it. And that means the burden of covering the cost falls on the consumers or the citizens as a whole through subsidy. In terms of the consumers, the electricity prices had gone up quite significantly in Bangladesh, and still it is not enough to cover the cost. And still almost $1 billion of subsidy is needed every year to make this system going. So it has been costly in that sense. The much talked about very large power plants, coal-based power plants, or renewable power plant power things did not really materialize to the extent we would have liked to see. So we are still operating on a high cost environment. The only large power plant that has come into operation is Pyra 1, but we just came into operation. The other big large projects are still far from completion. So we took a lot more time than we should have in installing those large power plants, and the cost has been high. Yes, we have done other strategies also as part of this thing to augment supply of electricity from India. That has worked in part. Maybe we can do more. Maybe we should involve the private sector into that. Maybe we need to get private interconnections to get private supplies. Right now it is G2G, government to government. We can create it G2P, G2G, G2 government corporations, and we can also connect it with the private sector to private sector sales based on everyday trade that's going on in the power auctions in India. So, but we don't have those regulatory framework. We don't have the infrastructure in place. But I know that private sector, if given the opportunity, they can take a big role in that area also. So we have opportunities to reduce the cost down the line, because if you buy power from India, it's quite cheaper. It's about half the price that we are generating in country right now on average. So we have that option, and we are using it. We also have the use of renewable in terms of hydropower in the northern parts of India, Bhutan, Nepal, but not much progress has been made. A lot can be done there. And I think we need to have joint initiative, regional initiative, BIBN type, Bangladesh, India, Bhutan, and Nepal network, power grid network, and power trade system. So investment jointly, so that we can tap those untapped potential, huge potential. There are more than 100,000 plus 125,000 plus megawatt of electricity generation capacity in untapped capacity in those areas. So there are huge potentials. We can work on those in future, and I think Bangladesh has the opportunity to really bring down our cost structure, and we should work on those things. Thank you very much for now.
Thank you, Dr. Mansur. I would like to bring in Professor Tamim. I think Dr. Mansur has talked about the cost of the energy transformation, and also he's talked about some of the options related stuff. You are a policymaker and you've been in the policy space for a long time on the energy sector. Let's talk about energy options. Energy option is critical in the development agenda of any country. Can you shed some light on what are the tough choices that Bangladesh had to make? I mean, now we are saying the cost is very high. Now we are saying that there is ideal power capacity, but what led to this, and why the high cost? Did the policymakers or people who were consulting didn't know about the high cost?
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to this webinar. In terms of policies in Bangladesh, we have had many long-term policies. But if you look at the path of progress in terms of power addition, the policy have not been really followed. So it has been more on an ad hoc and reactive basis that we have progressed so far. If you look at the master plans, there are 3 master plans: 2005, 2010, power system master plans I'm talking about, and 2016. Of course, for different reasons, the policy and the fuel mix changed with time, which is fine because the energy sector is very dynamic. The supply and demand scenario changes rapidly under different situations. So that is fine. But if you look at the energy mixes at any given point, none of the mixes has matched the predictions, the forecast. So what we are doing is not really following those forecasts. How we have come here, different time, different things have moved us from one option to another option. In 2005, the entire plan was based on gas, assuming that we have plenty of gas and we'll have those gas. That was a mistake by both Petrobangla and others to assume that we'll have that gas. By 2007, we found that there was no gas. Immediately, we switched to coal-based power plant. And that coal-based power plant, 2010 was heavily dependent on coal. 50% power would have come from coal in that projection in 2040. So that one also changed and that was more from a cost perspective, because coal was thought to be a cheaper option. And that time, the major pressure of government was increasing the power tariff from 2 taka 50 paisa to almost 6 taka, 7 taka. It went in 4 or 5 years time, 5 times increase in power, because we are importing oil for liquid-based power plants. So the the cost of production went up, and we thought that coal would give us the relief from that tariff pressure. But then we found that in that plan, 30% of the power was supposed to come from local coal. That is our Fulbari, Bodopukri, and our own coal fields. But the government then decided, no, we're not going to develop our own coal at all at this point. So immediately that became redundant. That plan was thrown out and then changed to 2016 plan, which is gas heavy, LNG import plus own gas, and still 35% coal. So different situations have changed our plans at different times. As a part of the 2010 plan, we have 3 major power plants which are coming in: Paira, Rampal, and Matarbari. I believe all these 3 will come in. And Paira second unit is actually ready. Because of the transmission line limitations, we are not able to get it from there. Somebody asked a question, what is our base load? If you ask me, for 2020 data, which was suppressed due to the COVID situation, the highest power demand was average demand was about 12,000 megawatt during the summer. During the winter, it was 9,000 megawatt. So there is a 3,000 megawatt difference between summer and winter. In terms of excess capacity, one has to understand in Bangladesh that because of these 5 months of low temperature situation, lower temperature, I'll not say cold, but lower temperature situation, the cooling load is much lower during this time. So about 3,000 to 3,500 megawatt power has to be kept there as a standby capacity for the summer load. And that that difference is actually increasing as people are using more and more cooling, refrigeration and air conditioning. In terms of, so there are different dynamics, as Professor Höhn and Dr. Höhn has told. Every country has unique situations, and our success in solar home system is now going down because of the expansion of the grid, which has reached 98% of the population. So people are now not that much interested in solar home system. They are rather take it from the grid. So solar home system had initial success, but now it has kind of stalled. In terms of renewables, we have many challenges. First of all, the renewable roadmap that has been shown is based on multiple ifs. One is the Delta 2100 plan, which will retrieve, it's a hydrological project that will retrieve a lot of land, and that land will be used for renewables. That's number one. Number two, the grid storage has to be there, and a smart grid, which is a very long, expensive process. Unless we have a smart grid, it is really difficult to accommodate, even 5,000 megawatt renewable energy. So currently, if you ask me about the options and optimizing, I would say we have a multi-source, kind of fuel option. So we will have to have those three coal power plants. We have to have LNG based power plants, and I will give more emphasis in import because that's cheap and clean energy for us. So increase the import and try as much renewable as possible in a distributed fashion. Currently in a distributed fashion, maybe in future, when the solution come in, we can go for grid level, more grid level as the grid improves. We'll have to go for that. So that way we can optimize. We can never go back to 2 taka 50 paisa, or 3-4 cents per kilowatt hour power situation. Never. We are looking at minimum 10 cents, which is 8.5 taka per kilowatt hour. That is the kind of electricity we are looking at in future. So, but we will have to optimize it with multi-source resources, because our economic development is number one priority. I would say that at this point, our economic development is so instead of carbon neutral approach, we'll have to go for minimum carbon emission approach instead of carbon neutral, because carbon neutral is very difficult to achieve for Bangladesh. Bangladesh will have to go for minimum carbon approach.
So in that case, Professor Tamim, do you think, we also have a question from the audience, that nuclear would be an option there?
Yes, nuclear is an option. I believe nuclear is an option, but the fear of the nuclear accidents is always there. But I understand the newer, actually, I was hearing Bill Gates yesterday in a CNN interview, and he was saying that nuclear is the best carbon neutral option for scaling up. Okay, so but again, there are many other factors. The technology, the human resource support, and the safety practices, grid stability. Many factors are involved. These are not so simple question to answer. I just say that, okay, go nuclear and have all sorts of nuclear power plant. That is not going to happen. But let us see, the nuclear power plant is going ahead quite well right now. Let us see how do we do with this one, and then only we'll know, because this is the first time we are having, a new technology in this country.
Thank you, Professor Tamim. Let me come to Dr. K.A.S. Murshid. Dr. Murshid, rural electrification, some would argue, is like the backbone of Bangladesh's economic development, in the sense that most of Bangladesh still lives in the rural areas, and rural electrification has been highly subsidized in Bangladesh. So, what are the energy sector lessons that that Bangladesh has taken or can share with others when it comes to rural power generation, power distribution?
All right, thank you very much, Onik, for inviting me to this event. Let me just start from a point that was raised by Tamim about what is the best mix. Just to make a very minor point here, that the best mix is changing quickly. So, what was the best mix 10 years ago will not be the next mix today, and it will not be the best mix in 10 years' time. It is a very rapidly moving target because of the rapid changes in technology. And this is very difficult to factor into any policy. But nevertheless, it's important to keep that in mind, bear that in mind, because there are various studies that have shown that if you look at past projections of mix and then look at the existing situation, then you would see a huge difference between the two. So that tells us that should alert us to a fundamental problem in planning supply and demand of energy, particularly power. Now back to the question on rural development, rural energy. More specifically, rural electrification. Now, you know that the institution charged with the role of rural electrification is the REB or BREV, Bangladesh Rural Electrification Board, which has been in existence since the mid-1970s. Now, it has come a long way. Now, I was just wondering, given the question, I was wondering how I should attempt to try and respond to it. You see, there haven't been any recent evaluations of REB that I know of. I doubt very much if there has been, because I was looking, I didn't find any. But I'm fortunate that I was able to lead an evaluation of REB in 2010. And so I have the memory of 2010 embedded in my mind. And when I sort of hear the figure of 100% coverage, and so how well we have done, and I begin to think that, okay, so where were we in 2010? Maybe that's something I could share with you. So that would kind of give us an indication of the journey that we have traversed from 2010 to 2020-21. Now, I remember while doing that survey, this was a panel survey, and one was done in 2005, and we did a repeat survey in 2010. At that time, the coverage was in terms of area, the spatial coverage, in terms of number of districts or number of thanas or upazilas, it was about 60 or 70%. In terms of percentage of households, it was probably under 40%. And the basic institutional arrangement through which REB functions is through its consumer cooperative societies called the PBS. And these societies are actually responsible for connecting to consumers. And they're well regulated. There's a board consisting of consumers. But the whole thing is closely monitored and overseen by REB. And it appears to be quite a strong, I wouldn't say it's flawless, but it appears to be a strong institutional arrangement whereby you try to bring in the interests of the consumers, reflect the interests of the consumers in your plans and the way you function and so on and so forth. Now, but going to the field in 2010, what we basically saw, first of all, there was a lot of unhappiness from the consumer side. The main reason for that was intolerable fluctuations in the electricity. Really, something like 28 outages per week. Each outage on average lasting an hour and a half to 2 hours. In other words, although you could claim that yes, or REB could claim that yes, we have connected so many households, so many thanas, but the fact is that these were not completely connected. So these people would still have to rely on kerosene for lighting or candles or whatever it is that they were using before being connected. And of course, for cooking, that's another story, and I won't get into that, except that that is entirely biomass and a lot of indoor pollution and that sort of stuff. It was difficult to get a connection. Wait times were high. Service delivery wasn't great. And maybe some of it was, some of the complaints were unfair, but nevertheless needed to be addressed. So in a way, so basically what you had was a situation of work in progress. You had a lot of transmission lines. You had the so-called the khambas, the posts, but these were not yet wired up in many parts of the country. And also, even when the electricity reached your village, you weren't being able to connect. Another problem was the high cost of connection. So these are huge problems, actually. Now, I'm thinking that if we have now come to a situation where pretty much everyone is connected, so this is nothing short of a miracle from there. This is a miracle because this means that people were connected and complained that was difficult to connect was not correct. And people would be incentivized to connect because maybe the pricing was lower, maybe the element of subsidy was lower. I'm not sure what the state of that is. It was easier to connect, and that most importantly, the level of load shedding or fluctuation must have gone down dramatically. This is what I'm assuming. Otherwise, we would not have this kind of success. So, and you know that RAB is not just dealing with households. They're connecting industries, rural industries, shops, various types of commercial entities. They're connecting farmers through solar pumps, solar irrigation, and so it's no longer just solar homes. For example, it's now expanded to many other areas, and REB is diversifying into those areas. So the portfolio has enlarged. Then also before, what REB was doing was essentially buying wholesale and then distributing. It is also now generating. So this is another new development. And therefore, I suspect that these are the elements, ingredients, that A, the institutional arrangements, the better service delivery, probably some attention to pricing problems, and fourth, generation ensuring that you have a stable source of electricity for your rural consumers. I think these are basically the things that one could pick up. And just a point on the solar hiccup that we experienced, particularly with IDCOL, because I was sitting on their board and I was seeing how desperate they were getting, because they were doing extremely well. Their expansion rate was phenomenal for a number of years, and then suddenly it all, really dropped, and to the extent that they were facing a kind of a mini bankruptcy because people were refusing to pay up anymore because they had grid connections, and they'd say, "Well, look, I'm not going to pay for your solar. You can take it back." So, and that actually was misplanning, and misplanning because both are World Bank projects. World Bank was financing solar homes, they're financing, grid, and one arm didn't look at the other, and they came into conflict, and they decided to let go of solar homes. So this could have been better planned. So I think there's a lesson to be learned over there. Well, thank you very much for giving me this time. I hope I've made some sense.
Thank you, Dr. Murshid. We'll give the floor to Ms. Höhn. She has raised her hands for a while. Please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Yes, I agree with Mr. Tamim because most of the countries has not a long-term strategy. And I think we need a bit more a long-term strategy. And even we need to implement different issues. For example, what you can learn from Germany is that we made a big mistake. So we only had a focus on electricity, but now we are more and more make sector coupling. So we are bringing our cooling and heating systems and our transport system all together. And that's very important because of the stability of the energy system. So because we have this mix, we have more storage possibilities, and we can look for a scenario of 100% renewable energies. That is, at the end of the day, even the perspective of Bangladesh. Not like industrial countries in 20 or 30 years, but maybe in 40 or 50 years. And that's why I said, congratulations that you change from coal-fired plants more to gas-fired plants, because gas-fired plants are more a bridge to renewables, and gas-fired plants are more flexible than coal-fired plants, because you have the problem with coal-fired plants that they are running the whole year. So if you need them or not, they are running, you know. But gas-fired plants you can use better as a mix with renewables. And for investing in gas-fired plants, the return of investment is only of 20 years with gas-fired plants, but the return of investment with coal-fired plants is about 40 years. So we have the problem in Germany that we have a lot of coal-fired plants and they are stranded investments because they will not work for the whole time of 40 years. So maybe we can learn something like that. And another, we are now discussing in Europe something, and even in Germany, something like a supply chain law. So you are very involved in textile industry, and our cotton industry is now looking for a CO2 footprint in the whole chain. So more and more companies are coming to me and to us and ask, what can we do for a whole supply chain for CO2-free production? And that means at the end, they would like to use renewables for electricity too, not only for the production of cotton, but also for manufacturing of cotton. And I think you must look, especially for your textile industry, for more maybe photovoltaic plants on the rooftops of that buildings, because the clothing companies will ask for that, you know. So that's one part. And the other part is we are now from Germany and from the GIZ. I think you have one of the GIZ and one of the next panels, I hope tomorrow. We are looking now from the GIZ and KfW for new financial tools. Because in the past we had financial tools only for from the KfW of 10 million euro, of 20 million euro, and now we are looking for smaller projects. And so we are looking for crowdfunding projects, we are looking for private capital. But that means on the other side, we have to look for the quality of the panels, we have to look for sustainability, good maintenance, so that there are different issues, and especially for training of the people. And that's why I said you have very good institution, you have the Infrastructure Development Company Limited, so because they are looking for all these issues. So you can use this instrument for maybe implementing other sorts of energy projects. I agree very much that every country is so different from the other that we can't transfer our solutions from one country to the other, but some abstract or some higher level issues, I think we can learn something from each other.
Mr. Höhn, you were the State Minister for Environment and Agriculture for a long time in Germany. Dr. Murshid's comments on rural electrification and how like Bangladesh dealt with it. Like when we talk about expansion of electrification, it's basically rural electrification and the last mile deliveries. And also Bangladesh, the Rural Electrification Board, which is a different institution, as he said, is producing its own power. So there has been some significant policy interventions there. What do you think? Like, is there any lesson in there for any other country or even from Germany's experience?
Yes, You know, I think it's very important to have some knowledge of agriculture and energy too, because you must combine this and even from water issues, you know. So energy is not a goal, but energy is an instrument to reach other goals. And especially if you are looking for productive use, not only for consumption, but also for productive use. You can use that in rural areas in a wide variety. So we have, for example, cooling systems for fish. That is very important. We have, for example, drying systems for fruits and vegetable. So we have more added values in the villages. We have more jobs, and even for handicraft jobs, we have a lot of possibilities with electricity. And that is the important fact. But also the health system. If you have a cooling system in your hospital, it's very important, especially now, if you have the vaccine problem of COVID-19, you need cooling systems in your hospitals. And so that means in rural areas, electricity is good for reaching the goals of about 2/3 of sustainable development goals. Especially, for example, my experience in Africa is it's really a gender issue, not only an education issue, because if you bring light to the schools, light to the households, the students have more possibility to learn. It's also a gender issue, because I learned from Africa that especially the women are the owners of maybe the solar home systems. And so they had income with the solar home system for a charger, mobile chargers. And so they have more income and have a bit more power in the family. That means energy is so important, especially in the rural areas. And if we combine, for example, the water issue, so the pumping situation, in most times we have now in the villages, we have as energy, we have diesel, we have kerosene, we have petroleum, and we have candles. And if we add all the costs of all of this together, we can do it cheaper with photovoltaic. And that's cheaper and with more clean air with photovoltaic.
Thank you. Professor Tamim, you had your hands raised, and there is also a question on wind potential in Bangladesh, which has been pretty much neglected, but if you want to address that also.
Okay, I'll do that. But the point I was trying to make, actually, I raised my hand to mention, is that in terms of sustainable development, we always focus too much on renewable. It's not that it is not the principal vehicle for attaining sustainable development. But one important factor we regularly forget is efficiency and conservation. Bangladesh has a very good opportunity to reduce its electricity consumption by at least 20%, according to the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Study by SREDA of 2015. You have to just look at it is only in the industrial sector. They didn't touch the appliances that is being used, the air condition, the fans and everything. So, and a drive on efficiency and conservation can reduce our energy requirement considerably, and the future demand may be controlled through this energy efficiency and conservation demand. In terms of wind power, we hear a lot of stories regarding, there is high wind in the offshore and all those things. But if you look at the geographic location of Bangladesh, there is no steady wind source in the country anywhere. Because wind sources are typically based on the, sun and ocean current and other things are all wind are all dependent on the location and the and also the topography. So looking at all those things, I don't think we have very high probability of any substantive win. Maybe we will have 100, 200 megawatt, maximum 400 megawatt, but that need to be seen. We have only half megawatt project, one project, and also a 2 megawatt project. None of them are working right now. We have signed a contract with the Chinese company for a 50 megawatt. We'll have to see that how that comes through, because we did sign similar contract before and nothing materialized.
Dr. Mansur, you said that privatizing the energy sector, at least partially, having a privatization policy in it, has been one of the vital things and one of the driving forces. And so, you also said that the cost of energy production in Bangladesh, like the transformation, that's been very high. Don't you think these are two conflicting issues? Like, won't privatizing have to take the blame for high cost of production?
No, I will not say that they are necessarily conflicting. That's a role of the regulator, which has not been properly done. So due diligence and proper costing, proper PPA, power purchase agreements, those are the key elements to that. You can make any project viable if you put $20 per kilowatt hour or $2 per kilowatt hour. But your role should be that I will reduce it to like 8 cents or 10 cents or 5 cents, not 20 taka or so on and so forth. So there has been a regulatory issue there, but you can't blame the private sector for that. Private sector only responds to the incentive structure that you set up and work within that framework. What I was thinking is not, we don't need any more, I mean, private sector will be coming from the generation sector, given the current state of affairs. There is no problem there. Foreign and domestic both are keen to come into that generation side. I'm looking more into the distribution side, into transmission side, and those are the areas where we need to open up the private sector for greater engagement. I want to get back a little bit of some of the other discussions that happened in that. The nuclear power plant, my one major concern is that there are many other unknowns, including accidents, etc., is the disposal of spent fuel. We will be solely dependent on Soviet Union for under the contract for taking the spent fuel. But this is an area where we cannot be doing an expansion plan massively and be dependent on a single country's whim to take up, because we don't have any alternative. We don't have any place to bury those nuclear spent fuel in Bangladesh territory. So that is one other area that, in addition to other deep concerns that I have about nuclear power expansion. I think the best mix issue is always going to be, I agree with the other discussants that will be supplied, will be a dynamic phenomena. Initial condition is one that will determine, because in Bangladesh case, the initial condition was so severe that we had to do a very unorthodox approach, a very small scale, low scale, quick rental power plants, etc., etc. But not anymore. So initial conditions will determine the strategy going forward. You cannot take it for granted for every country. On the REB side, I want to make a few observations. My current feeling is that yes, 100% of the households may be approached, but load shedding is widely there. In my own village, when I go there, they are only thinking still in terms of providing power at night, not during the day. But the rural economy today is non-farm sector is quite active, and they need power. They need power even in the rural areas during the daytime, not only for studying at night or doing nightly activities. So we have to change our mindset that we cannot be having whole day, half day load shedding of power by the REB and expect that if the power comes back by the evening, it's fine. No, it's not fine, because there are many non-farm activities which are going on daytime, and they need power. And electricity power is used widely in agriculture, in threshing machines, in husking, in oilseed machines, in powering the batteries of the vehicles that be widely used in rural areas. You name it, pumping water from the well. So these are widely used, and it's no longer a luxury item. like in urban areas and so on anymore in Bangladesh rural economy. I think we have to look at fresh on the renewable issues, because and also on the conservation issue. Conservation, we only give lip service. We really don't give any serious strategy on conservation as of now, not proper strategy incentives also in the conservation strategy of our country. We need to focus on that. And renewables potentials are limited, but agricultural irrigation facilities can be transformed into solar panels. Rooftop RMGs should be massively done. And water bodies, we can also use part of those for purpose of renewable generation. If we do those things, we can, I believe, achieve at least the 10% target that the government has, which is a very modest target, but we can achieve that. In addition, I would still think that we should also try to import as much renewable energy from India, because they are very cheap there, and at the auctions, the prices have collapsed and there's overcapacity. So renewable, we can buy from there. It will be good for them, it will be good for us, and it could develop a bigger market so that in Indian deserts, they can really do a lot more renewable solar panels and create energy, and Bangladesh can share from that as well.
Dr. Mansur, you talked about renewables. Do you think the renewables should be subsidized in Bangladesh or further subsidized in Bangladesh?
It should be selectively, case by case, not blanket kind of things, because we have to be careful about. For example, windmills. I agree with Dr. Tamim that there is very limited instances that it can be successful, very limited locations. So we cannot generalize it and make it in many places without the fundamentals. So subsidy elements should be carefully thought through, and the strategy should be that, yes, we can really do it cost effectively. If it is not really, and over time, it should be sustainable. Over time, maybe in 5 or 10 years' time, it should be sustainable time. But we have to think about that. The experience of other countries gives us encouragement. The subsidy works, and we should also use subsidy to incentivize people to renewables.
Thank you. Dr. Murshid, you have had your hands up. If you could take the floor now.
Thank you, Anik. I just wanted to come back on a couple of points. On private enterprise and allowing the private sector greater space to operate in this area. They already account for nearly 45% of the generation market. So it's not that they're being ignored not by a long shot. And I'm sure they would love to have more. But
I was talking about generation and transmission.
Generation.
No, I'm talking about transmission and distribution. Sorry.
Okay.
Generation is taken care of.
But nevertheless, the general point really is that the private sector in Bangladesh has come to a position where it is no longer to be dismissed in any way. I mean, they're in terms of numbers, in terms of power and influence, they have matured. I mean, going by one estimate, there may be more than $100 billion conglomerates in Bangladesh today. So the problem that I face is that, you see, our experience with privatization of nationalized industries has not been great. So it's not that, it's not an automatic solution to just say that let's privatize, so let's do this or do that. Regulation is key. But in a situation where the political economy will decide how effective regulation will be, we have to be careful that we do not give away too much space to the private sector. It has to be controlled, it has to be managed, and it has to be manageable for our regulators. So that's the point. I think the political economy dimension should never be forgotten. On renewable energy, I think we still don't know what our potential is. Some years ago, they said we didn't have a lot of potential. These days, it seems that there may be quite a lot of solar potential. Wind has always been marginal at the very best. Solid wastes, again, there's a lot of excitement around solid wastes, particularly for rural areas and for cooking.
So I think, again, this is, but we need to make a move because all the countries in the region, India, China, everyone who can are moving to renewables, whether it's solar, whether it's wind, whatever it is that capacities that they have, comparative advantage that they have. So this is something that even if we do have to subsidize, we certainly need to explore this much more thoroughly than that we have so far. Other point I would like to make, there was a mention that we've moved out of coal. I'm not sure that we have. Actually, we haven't moved out of coal. And so, but this is a debate that's ongoing, and we hope that there will be some resolution sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Dr. Murshid, so some would argue that the success of Bangladesh's longest national plan, the Delta Plan, is based, especially the renewable success, is based on the Delta Plan. The success of renewables in Bangladesh is based on the Delta Plan. But you had argued that, you had alluded that long-term planning may not be the best idea, in the energy sector because constant shift of strategy is needed. So do you see the contradiction in it or something else?
The Delta Plan is for 100 years. And, when we can't actually forecast 5 years, 100 years, it's an indicative plan. So as far as that kind of planning is concerned, some scenario building and making some visionary assessments, that's one thing. But when you come down to brass tacks and have to make policy, then unless you can forecast demand accurately, see, why are we saddled with such excess capacity? Our consumption is 12 and our generation is 23. The reason why we have this situation is because it's impossible to plan. Sitting here today and trying to say that what will our demand be in 20 years' time, in a situation where the technology is moving so rapidly, where we really don't know whether the income projections or GDP projections, how accurate those are going to be over that year. How many more COVIDs are we going to face? Have we taken into account the existing impact of COVID on future demand? So there are many unforeseens. And that is why I say that it is a risky thing. Of course, we have to plan. We still have to plan. And maybe we will continue to make some errors. But let's be aware of that.
Thank you, Professor Tamim. I'd come to you. You have your hands up. I have a question for you and Mrs. Höhn. That is, policymakers in Bangladesh and many developing countries often like to talk about number of megawatts added, but they never talk about how much has been saved, conservation that Dr. Mansur had alluded to. If you can shed some light on it, and then we'll come to Mrs. Höhn.
Thank you so much. Yes, I would react to some of the other speakers too, because I think we have a very, very interesting debate. And I'm very clear that because I'm not only a politician, I studied mathematics and economy. And so from this view, from my education, I would say, yes, indeed, we have the situation that we have not really a plan what will be in 100 years or in 50 years, because that can change a lot. But even because we don't know that, it's I think more intelligent to react with investments that had not a long time of capital return, and so have maybe more flexible instruments because we can react of the situation that will happen. Yeah, for example, like this COVID situation. I would say, yes, one idea is what is the electricity we need, but the other is that we need electricity in every second. So we have energy safety too. That is very important, especially in Germany. It's very important because we are an industrial country. We're one of the most, the strongest industrial countries in the world. And so in Germany, it's very important to have energy safety in every second. But although we have more than 50% of our electricity coming from renewables, more than 50% in Germany, from wind, from solar, from biomass, and from hydro. Although we have more than 50% in our electricity mix from renewables, we have only some minutes in the year that we have blackouts. So we are one of the countries in the world that have the most safe electricity situation in the world, better than other countries, even better than most of the other countries. But as I said, you have to look of the situation in every country. For example, in Germany, as some of you told of the different situation in summer and winter, in Germany, we have more in the winter, our wind turbines, and more in the summer, our photovoltaic plants. So in Germany, we now need more photovoltaic plants to have a balance between summer and winter. And then we have really a good situation. So we thought 10 years ago, we need a lot of storages, pumping storages and everything to have this electricity safety. But now we know if we combine different sorts of renewables, for example, if we mix the sector coupling, so if we have enough wind, more than we need, we can use this wind for power to gas or power to hydro, you know. So we do that, for example, in the north of Germany. We have in Schleswig-Holstein, the north part of Germany, we have 150% of electricity demand now. But we have a lot of situations where we have wind and we can't use this electricity. But we can then change it to, for example, gas, or change it for hydro, or power to heat, or power to cooling systems. So if we mix our sectors more, we need less storages. And we have now the situation that we have really a boom of photovoltaic plants on the rooftops of family houses. So everybody would like to invest now in photovoltaic. And if you see this potential, Germany needs really a lot of electricity. If you see this potential, you can see that we have more and more potential for producing electricity with photovoltaic than we use now. One very important point is if your economy is growing and growing, you need something like smart grids and more digital solutions. For example, in Germany, we were talking about demand side management. For example, I am living in the very industrial part of Germany. I am living in the Ruhr region. So I'm living in the region of coal mines, you know, lignite, coal, and really the old fossil energy production here in Germany. But we have also big industry, for example, aluminium. And if such a big industry would say, okay, now you have only a short time, a big demand of electricity, so we will shut down our production for 1 hour and get some money of it. So that are something like demand side management, and that is cheaper than to have the electricity demand of the whole time and nobody needs it, only for maybe half an hour, a peak of that. Yes, that means if we are thinking about renewables, it must be more flexible, the grids must be more intelligent, and in the past, when we had only our coal and nuclear power plants, there was nothing to do with the grids because we had every time the same electricity in the grid. Now we must manage the grids. That is really another sort of work, but we can do it. And even in a big economy like Germany, it's possible to do it.
Thank you. Professor Tamim, if you take the floor now, you had your hands up. And another question from the floor, I'll just throw it at you. That is, if we import, then our aim of decentralized energy, or at least the target, if we want to set any target of the of decentralized energy, that goes away. So if you could comment on that.
Currently, there is no plan of decentralized energy by the government. It's all centralized. The grid power is centralized. And as a result, as I've already told, that the solar home system is kind of dying down because of the grid connectivity. So before connecting a remote area through grid connection, government actually should have thought about the solar home systems. But nowadays, because of the unreliability of the power, many solar home systems are still existing and they are keeping it as a backup for power. But there is no decentralized renewable energy or other solid waste. We are talking about solid waste. There is biomass gas production for cooking and stuff, but power production in rural area, biomass is used, alternate use are there. City waste is very difficult. It is sorting and delivery assurance. Sorting and delivery assurance is a problem, but there are some projects, I think, under consideration going on. At least one project I know they're thinking of doing it from the city waste. In terms of planning, the Delta plan and the whole solar system, if we look at the Delta plan, as Dr. Murshid rightfully said, that this is a vision. There is not really any solid thing on the ground yet. And based and Ms. Höhn, what she mentioned, why I'm saying all these things, because Bangladesh, to go for a sustainable growth energy future, is very challenging, especially for renewable. They have multiple sources. They have wind, they have biomass, they have solar, they have regional connectivity. We don't have any of those. If there is a rainy day and hardly we are dependent on 5,000 megawatt solar, what is the backup? Typically, alternate, if the wind is there, you can always make up with the wind. And also the grid situation. She mentioned the grid is much more smarter, all automated. We don't have even an independent system operator, ISO, which is required to distribute and generation and usage of power. We don't have that. So it is a challenge. I'm not discouraging, but my current focus is to support our economic growth. While we are talking and taking action, doing all these efforts, we cannot sit back and stop the projects because we will have those things in future or we are in the process of making it. We must support our economic growth. And that is a priority for me in terms of economic growth in this country. Yes, we will transit, but not so fast. We simply cannot transit from the current conventional planning to integrated resource planning in a quick switch. It has to be a gradual, and government has to have the intention of doing it actually, which I don't see yet.
Professor Tamim, I wanted your comment on MW produced versus MW saved, and
megawatt saved is always cheaper, but there is zero political mileage in megawatt saved. So the politicians have an incentive to add a megawatt which is visible, which can be shown and can be claimed that I have added this much. Right now, our effective production capacity is actually 15,000 megawatt, and that's only 13% above the highest demand, which is 13,000 megawatt. So rest 5,000 megawatt, what is happening? What is there? Why it is there? There are many old plants which are forcibly shut, not being operated, unforced. And of course, when we have the gas, we keep the oil capacity in place and we use gas. We have 50%, only 58% gas-based power plants last year. We had the total power plant is gas-based is 58% and 35% is oil-based. But we produce 71% of energy through gas. That means the oil-based power plants were sitting there. So there are several factors that need to be looked into, because in the zest of adding more power, the forecast has to be looked into too. If you look at the forecast, the 5-year power forecast and the PSMP 2016 and 8th 5-year plan, which has been done in 2020, in 4 years time, the 2025 demand has been upgraded, upended by 10,000 megawatt, where it is showing 2016 is showing that 2025 demand will be 20,000 megawatt. The 8th 5-year plan is saying that it will be 30,000 megawatt in 2025. So already about 20,000 megawatt power projects are in line that might come up until by 2030. That is the objective, in the hope that our economic growth will require that kind of energy. But we have seen in the last 3-4 years that the demand in industrial sector has not gone up. So the energy demand coupled with economic elasticity and economic growth has already a disconnect, and it must be decoupled. I believe that the energy forecast has to be done independently. Instead, I mean, economic growth may happen without much pull in the energy. There is no doubt GDP grows, energy requirement will grow. There is no doubt. But is there a one-on-one or linear relationship? If we put that one-on-one linear relationship, then we end up with a huge amount of excess capacity. That need to be decoupled.
Thank you. So we have heard about problems with projections. Dr. Mansur, you have been involved in many of this national planning. The projection seems to be off too many often. Do you have a comment on that?
Yes, I mean, projections can always be off, and for various reasons, ex post facto. We have to use the available projected elasticity of demand and use that as the basis for or the aggregate basis. But let's look at it. Why industrial sector did not demand as much? There are two issues here. First of all, we have to see that the industrial sector in Bangladesh is still relying on captive power. And captive power is cheaper for them. So if the government's pricing policy to make captive power attractive is self-defeating for the point of view of industrial offtake of electricity. Dr. Tamim knows it. So I think he can elaborate it further. So we need to address that problem. As long as you keep gas cheap and make the captive power more attractive, you have that problem. Secondly, your grid system, transmission system is so bad that you cannot really provide electricity to vast areas of Bangladesh on a continuous basis. The quality of electricity, quality of supply of electricity. Every time I have a small project, and I know that almost on an average 8 hours to 12 hours, it runs on generator, and I have to buy equal amount of electricity bill as fuel for the generator. Why? It's because of the inefficiency. Then how would you generate the demand? So you need to generate the demand by creating reliable, dependable supply sources. You have to generate the demand by not making those captive powers much more attractive, so that they are holding on to it and generating more captive power and meeting their demand, and they don't want access. And the third is that the grid power is very expensive in Bangladesh. Right now, for example, in my own small establishment, I'm paying 12 taka or 11 taka something as the power price. Very high, I think, by any standard. It's it's much more than 14, 15 cents a kilowatt hour. It shouldn't be that high. So we need to address those things before we can see the offtake in demand. Otherwise, people will not use the grid electricity very soon, and then will become much more dependent on alternative ways of generating the power. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mansur. So this brings us to the end of the discussion. We'll have last quick comments from everyone, because I feel like it's been quite a contentious discussion and debate. Dr. Murshid, would you like to go first?
Well, I was just thinking that looking to the future, an area that actually we have not discussed very much, except in passing, but that I guess will need to be squarely tackled. This is the whole issue of energy pricing policy. And unfortunately, because of this, multifarious sources, different costs, different operators, different levels of subsidies to different types of entities, this is a jungle actually. And I think the time has really come to try and sort these out into much more manageable categories. A few categories would make sense. And this would also prevent us from it being non-transparent. And at the heart of, I think, the energy policy, ultimately the pricing will determine the incentives. And unless we get the pricing right, we will not have the optimal technical or social mix. So let me just leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Murshid. Mrs. Höhn, would you like to make your last comment?
Mm-hmm. Only short sentences. I would say thank you very much for the debate, and maybe one idea. Don't say we have no biomass, we have no wind, we have no photovoltaic, because you have. Maybe you have another situation than in Germany, but you have. In Germany, 20 years ago, all the fossil lobby said, we have no potential of renewables. Now we have more than 50%. And you have agriculture. I was the Minister of Agriculture, and I said to the farmers, you are the energy producers of the future. Because in agriculture, you have biomass, and you can use this biomass first for energy and after that as fertilizers. So be open in your thinking and be optimistic. And then we all together can look for solutions. Thank you very much for this debate.
Thank you. Professor Tamim.
You mentioned that it was a contentious debate, but I don't think so. I think this kind of talking is required. We learn from each other, and we have to be optimistic, as Ms. Höhn just mentioned. What I want to mention is that there are challenges that there, and we want sustainable development, sustainable energy. That is our ultimate goal. There is no doubt about that. Let us not have any debate on that, because we cannot live and run on fossil fuel. But there is a time frame and transition period, and depending, multiple factors are involved in a decision making in a country, which is a political decision. And political decisions are made on the basis of the ability and the resources that in hand for the government. So that is very important factor you have to remember. And overall efficiency of the sector in terms of planning and execution depends on governance. So we have not talked about governance. Overall governance and energy sector governance is very important, and that need to be looked into actually and restructured properly.
Dr. Mansur, last comment by you, please.
Well, thank you very much for organizing this event. And a lot of issues came up, and the key thing is that pricing is one of the issues that looked at. As Dr. Tamim said, governance is another issue. We touched upon those things. And I believe Bangladesh is still one of the lowest user of electricity per capita terms. We have a long way to go. We have a long journey ahead. If we really want to be a developed industrial country, look at the German per capita use and what Bangladesh stands. How many fold we have to go? So we have to keep generating, but we have to use the generated electricity in such a way, in affordable manner, that so if we have affordable electricity for our consumers, and this can be done. The issue is that how do we minimize our waste in the system through proper governance and through proper infrastructure use, so that we can achieve that. We have miles to go. We can increase our demand. We can increase our supply. We can create a vibrant economy. Without power, there is no future in industrial development. That is forgone. So we have to use power in every aspect in our life, and we hope the government will make it much more affordable and much more reliable for us to move in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mansur. This brings us to the end. It was a great discussion. Clearly, renewables has to be part of the mix. Everybody has agreed with that, but how do we go around it? That is the question. I think Bangladesh is a young country. It is in its 50th year, and it is graduating from to a middle income from LDC very soon, and it has graduated into a middle income economy previously. And increasing energy efficiency conservation is also clearly something came up from in the panel, and I think there are a lot of researchers around the world who are watching this this panel, and they'll have it wasn't too academic. It was very policy oriented, but I think they have a lot. They have learned some bit, and they have posed many questions to us, and many of you answered that. So thank you. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. And back to you, Sebastian.
Thank you so much, Onik. It certainly was, and I think we certainly will approach, we as academics, the panelists, because we would like to get some research output out of this, because I think contentious or not, it was a fantastic panel, and I think we couldn't have wished for a better impetus and kickoff for our conference. So thank you all very much.